Anthony Pereira is a professor at the Brazil Institute and the Department of International Development at King's College here in London. Professor, welcome. What swung it for Boric after the first round? This looks really unlikely.
Yeah, it may not have been as unlikely as we would have thought at first blush, because as you imply, it is unusual in a two-round presidential election for the person that finishes second to actually win in the second round. We can usually extrapolate from the small margin that the winner has in the first round, and they usually get the second round. That didn't happen this time. I haven't pored over the election results to really break it down in detail, but I do suspect that one of the reasons is that Boric was able to get a majority is that Cast was not in the mold of Sebastián Piñera, the outgoing president. He was far to the right of that. He was someone who praised the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet that was in power in Chile from 1973 to 1990. That was quite a vicious regime, lots of human rights abuses, and we know now also corruption. He's also a supporter of Jair Bolsonaro, the far-right president of Brazil who was elected in 2018. And although we tend to think of Chile as a fairly conservative country, fairly market-oriented country, it has been shaken up, as your package suggested, by the 2019 protests. And now you have a quite progressive constitutional assembly in the process of creating a new Chile. So I think there was a mood for change here. And there is a generally anti-incumbent mood in many Latin American countries right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're describing some of the qualities that the former president Sebastián Piñera had, or the current incumbent who's going to give up power in March. The thing is, Piñera is the only right-wing president that Chile has had since 1990, when Pinochet stepped down and the country became a democracy. It's either had a leftist or center-left president and only one right-wing president. So is it fair to blame the country's inequality on the right?
I think partially, I would say. I mean, because when you look at reforms that haven't tried to address inequality, such as the public employment schemes that were cooked up by the Concertación government, the center-left coalition government in the 1990s, that was pushed largely by the left. The right has been much more concerned with economic growth and productivity. I know it sounds like a cliche, but it's generally true. The left has been more concerned about inequality. But I think the assumption of your question is also right in the sense that there has been a consensus since the transition to democracy in 1990 that the basic broad outlines of the Pinochet economic policies, the very neoliberal economic policies, would be maintained by governments of both the center-left and the center-right. And that's what I think is significant about this election. Boric is saying, we don't want that anymore. We want to break with that consensus. We want, we're willing to raise taxes, to improve pensions, to improve health, to improve education, to try to make society more equal, more social democratic. So I think this really does mark a break with all of that consensus that you talked about, those 5 previous presidents.
We got some pictures of Boric at La Moneda, the presidential palace in Santiago, meeting Sebastián Piñera. I mean, you couldn't think of 2 more different characters. Piñera, the veteran, the billionaire, Boric, the young man, 35 years old, coming in on this wave of enthusiasm to try to satisfy those hundreds of thousands of people who over the past few years have been on the streets, have been demonstrating against this inequality, against this system that they say only benefits the elite. How difficult is it going to be for Boric to break that mold? Because sure, you're right about the neoliberal economy that Chile has that's driven it forward and made it so successful. I mean, you could say that that was imposed by the United States with the whole Chicago boys style, that you study, right-wing economics at the University of Chicago, then you impose that on the people of Latin America. How difficult is the challenge ahead?
I think it's difficult everywhere to tackle inequality. People often look at relative gains, and if they don't feel that they're gaining, even if inequality is being reduced, they often rebel against the government. So, he does have to fulfill his campaign promises. He's going to have to raise taxes. However, you have seen it in Chile in the past where taxes have been raised and there has been a consensus formed. And I think it's also significant that Boric is moving beyond some of the old stereotypes of the Latin American left as well. He hasn't been afraid to criticize the authoritarianism of governments in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and in Cuba. And that marks a break with some, the previous generation of leftists who may have felt that they had to defend those regimes. So I think potentially, if he can create new policies, and some of these policies, the privatization of the pensions, I think, is deeply unpopular because of how inegalitarian it is. If he can create new policies that seem to give people more access to good quality public services as a way to ameliorate income inequality, he may be able to bridge those divides, bridge that polarization. And I think people in other countries, the Brazilians, for example, are going to be looking at this transition and saying, wow, the defeated candidate went to congratulate the winner. Maybe there can be an election like that in 2022 in Brazil, despite the polarization there. So I think this could become an example to other democracies in the region.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly could be an example for Brazil. Anthony Pereira, Professor, thank you so much indeed. Always enjoy talking with you.